Liam Lawson, Red Bull driver 2025. Congratulations, first of all. How does that sound, actually, hearing that? It must have feel like a long time coming for you.
It's just quite crazy, to be honest. It's still very obviously surreal. It's obviously just happened, so but it's very exciting. It's something that's obviously, I've worked towards for a long time. Probably didn't expect it this quick, but obviously something that I feel ready for and I'm excited for it.
Kind of wild as well, because 12 months ago from sitting here, you didn't have a race seat for the following season. You obviously come back this year.
Even 6 months ago.
Yeah, 6 months ago. How do you reflect on this past couple of months? Because it's been such a whirlwind for you, just from, what was it, Singapore Ricardo's last race, you coming back in Austin, from that point to now, it must feel kind of a crazy journey to have been on.
Yeah, it is crazy. I think I knew the opportunity that was coming, and I knew that it was looking like it was going to happen towards the end of this year. And I also knew that coming in, it was almost not an audition, but in a way, an audition for the Red Bull seat, just because obviously the team at that point were losing the constructors and they were looking to make a change. And it wasn't, specifically you do this job and you get a Red Bull seat. It was, any time that you're in the sister team, that you're auditioning for a Red Bull seat in the future. So I knew coming in that's what was happening. But to be honest, I wasn't expecting it towards the end of the year. That was more of probably a recent thing.
And how was the pressure in those final races with that in mind? I know that there's been a lot of talk around this kind of Qatar onwards. How did you find that dealing with going into those final two races, especially with this kind of potentially on the horizon?
Yeah, it was tough. I mean, Abu Dhabi as well. Just knowing what was sort of going on, I knew that if I just did a decent job at that point, that I was in a good position, and qualifying pressure, just I was able to clear it out for the laps that I was pushing, but everything in between, out laps, in laps, sitting in the garage, it was obviously in the back of your mind, and you do everything you can to clear it out and try and just focus, because at the end of the day, when you're thinking about that stuff, it's not really, there's no benefit to it. Doesn't make you drive better. So yeah, I tried to clear it out as much as I could, but obviously it's a huge opportunity and I knew it was right there. And obviously I wanted it so badly that it was hard not to think about it.
Did that experience earlier in the year, kind of being on the sidelines, coming back, did that help ultimately, having that so fresh in your mind, that kind of pressure that you were dealing with then, to then kind of almost step it up a bit from RB to the Red Bull seat as well?
I think pressure is something that comes with being a Red Bull driver. It comes with being a junior. It's something that gets sort of put on us as almost as a kid. When I was 16, I got signed, and from that point onwards, I've had the pressure of helmet and performing in junior categories. And I think it builds you for Formula One ultimately. So now I'm extremely thankful to have gone through that, as much as I hated it at the time. It's something that I think has made me a lot more ready for something like this.
Yeah, and those calls from Helmut Marko are quite famous, that drivers get calls pretty much after every race. What happens now? Do they intensify? Does he call you more often? Are the calls, do you have to answer them even quicker now? Like, how do you think that goes?
It goes back and forth. You sometimes you get a lot of phone calls, sometimes you don't get a lot of phone calls. Sometimes when you don't get a lot of phone calls, it can be a good thing because it means you're doing okay, but it also can be a bad thing. It's it depends on how the season's going or what you're doing. So sometimes they're a 6 a.m. phone call, and that's something that's, I remember being young and when I first got signed, getting a phone call at 6 a.m. and waking up as quickly as I could and trying to make sure I sounded like I was wide awake at that point and not had been sleeping. I don't know why I did that, to be honest, but something that I felt was needed, and it's been like that since I was 16.
Have you ever missed one from him?
For sure, and you, so if you're on a flight or something like that and you land and it pops up and you're like, oh, I gotta call him back. Definitely.
Speaking of phone calls and just generally, messaging, I know that today's been quite an emotional day. What's it been like kind of relaying the news back to your family? I know that whenever a driver is kind of progressing through the ranks, it's not just them, the family is kind of going with them on the journey. What's that been like, kind of conveying that to your folks and to your family? For me, it's probably one of my favorite parts. Getting the news was obviously the most exciting, but then realizing I get to tell my dad and my parents, that what we've been working towards, my whole life basically,
is finally happening, and it was cool to tell my dad, especially. He's been obviously with me from the very start. He's somebody who played a big role and was a big influence in my mentality as a kid. You know, being from New Zealand, it's not something that you can just become a Formula One driver, especially when you're from New Zealand. And I had so many, kids, friends around me when I was young that never even tried because it was so unrealistic, and they were told by their parents that you can't do it. But I was lucky that even though we didn't have, loads of money or anything like that, but my parents, gave me the belief that if I wanted to do something and I worked hard enough for it, that I could do it. And, fortunately that mentality stuck with me all the way through.
Yeah. We're sat here now in front of some of this company's, most famous cars. I mean, it's a pretty impressive collection. In terms of actually stepping up to the Red Bull Racing team, it's become such a dominant piece of the Formula One puzzle. That must be special in itself. But what does this company mean to you as well? Just the backing they've given you, the support they've shown you from the beginning, really.
Yeah, I mean, without them, I wouldn't be here. So for me, it's a big part of why I've been able to get to this point. I was 16 when I was signed, and every opportunity since then has come from Red Bull. So it's pretty crazy. Something that, for me, it's a team that I watched growing up. I was 8 when Vettel won his first World Championship in 2010. To basically play as, in the Formula One games, to play as a Red Bull driver, and it was, a dream of mine since I was young. Then coming to Europe and seeing other Red Bull juniors when I wasn't one, and thinking that was just the coolest thing, to then obviously becoming one. Obviously it's crazy to look back and see how everything's played out, but for me, without Red Bull, I definitely wouldn't be here.
Did you play as Seb or Mark when you were doing those?
I played as Mark so that I could race against Seb.
Right.
Because he was winning the championship, so I wanted to, wanted to pretend I could beat him,
Well, and it's quite good practice, I suppose, for the situation you're going into. All of the cars behind you are Max's with the 33 on them. It's such a big challenge, and such a high benchmark. How do you think that's going to be stepping into a car alongside the 4-time world champion who's won the last 4 consecutively? What do you think that's going to be like?
It's, it's probably the hardest place to be, but also it's, it comes with the most opportunity. He's obviously the best in the world right now, so there's nobody better to learn off. There's nobody better to be alongside. Every session that I'm driving, I get to basically look at all of his data and see exactly how he does it. So it's a great opportunity, as much as I know it's going to be extremely tough. There's nobody better to learn off.
Do you set yourself targets? Do you go into next year saying, I've got to win one race, a couple of races? Is it just be at the absolute minimum, be the baseline that Red Bull need you to be back in that constructors fight? How do you look at it?
I think that's, from a team perspective, I think they're obviously fighting for the constructors, and that's the goal next year. I think if we're achieving that, then I'm doing my job at that point. So for the first, I think that's probably the first goal. Obviously, personally, I have a goal of winning world championships, and that's what I'm here to do. So that's not what I expect to go in and start doing straight away, but I guess trying to get onto a level as quickly as possible that I need to be able to do that is the goal for me next year.
I think you've kind of shown people how you'll race as well. You've been quite aggressive on track. I remember Fernando kind of, you and him had that. Is that what fans can expect? That you're a guy that's gonna, if you're sharing tarmac with another driver, it's gonna be tough for them to get past you.
I mean, I'll try and make it as tough as possible. I think, that's how I've always raced, and it's never personal against any driver, but I definitely won't change the way that I race. Yeah.
Nice. Well, I think people are going to look forward to that. Just finally as well, I don't know how well you get on with Max, but I mean, have you had a chance to speak to him yet about next year? Is that even how it works in Formula One? You guys are kind of teammates. It's such a weird sport. You're teammates, but they always say the first person you've got to beat is your teammate. How do you think that will work? I know you guys are slightly different age as well.
I think honestly, it's I don't know. From a team perspective, it's probably a little bit different, because when you're in the sister team, when you're in VCARB, you really are expected to beat your teammate, because you qualify. You're being evaluated for the seat here all the time. Whereas when you're in Red Bull Racing, I think your personal goal is to win, and that's what my goal is, and that's to beat everybody on track. But from a team perspective, obviously they're fighting for the constructors, so I think they don't expect that so much. But yeah, I think it's going to be very challenging.
Nice. Liam, congratulations again, and thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for watching ESPN on YouTube. And for more sports highlights and analysis, be sure to download the ESPN app. And for premium content and live streaming, subscribe to ESPN Plus.